This morning, we are launching Schooling Under Stress. That's a new series from CBC News, bringing together the voices and stories of teachers and staffers from all across the country as they and we and you try to make sense of this first full academic year under the pandemic. This morning, we are rolling out the results of a comprehensive survey. More than 9,000 educators and staffers and administrators responded to our questions about everything from vaccinations, about how they're managing the curriculum. Here are some of the findings. Nationwide, 70% of respondents agree some students will not catch up academically. About 90% of responding teachers think the pandemic will have at least some psychological impact on some students, 60% saying they strongly agree with that. And as we look to the other side of the classroom, about 81% of administrative staff say they strongly agree they are worried about teacher burnout. You heard from Deanna Sumanak-Johnson a little bit earlier in our hour. And you heard, as part of her reporting, our next guest, who has taken a close look at the questionnaire. Dr. Todd Cunningham is with us this morning, a clinical and school psychologist and assistant professor in the teaching stream at the University of Toronto, and he has his own private practice as well. Dr. Cunningham, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm interested in your insight. We heard a little bit of your comments to Deanna, so we can expand on those for a few minutes together. I know, as I was mentioning, you've been briefed up on the CBC News questionnaire and its responses. What was your overall reaction to the results?
Well, as you know, about 10,000 educators, or about 2% of those in Canada, respond. And really, they make sense. You know, three main themes really come to the surface when we look at these results. The first one is both teachers and principals report that education has been significantly disrupted during this pandemic. The second thing is both teachers and principals report that the challenges of this year will have some long-lasting impact on some students. And the third thing is that both students and teachers' mental health has been impacted during the last year.
Okay, let's look at each of those in a little bit more detail, and we have the numbers to bolster your statement. So the first one, more than 73% of respondents, so nearly 3/4 of the teachers and administrators and staffers who answered the questionnaire said they were a bit behind or were far behind in terms of the schedule on delivering the curriculum. So right there, that gets to the notion you were mentioning of how much a disruption to education the pandemic has caused.
Yeah, and it makes sense again, because when we think about this, really in March, when the pandemic hit, we really had kind of emergency remote teaching. We didn't have online learning. We had a response to a quick need. Teachers and students were quickly having to adjust to this new world of online learning the new software, as well as trying to keep up with the curriculum. And then when we moved into September, and some students went online and some students went back and did in-class learning, well, then we had closures, which then forced everybody back online. And one thing we have found is that transition time from in-class to back to online learning takes some time. So when we look at the original group of students who kind of began to go, who started in September in online learning, it took both their teachers and the students about a few weeks to get used to it. And then you have these other teachers who were thrown back into having to jump back into online learning at different points throughout the year. And again, those disruptions happen. So it makes sense that, you know, we would see less time on task as both students and teachers adjusted to the online learning environment, or this emergency remote teaching environment, which is not the traditional online learning that we see in the research.
You mentioned long term, and the number again from the questionnaire, 70% of respondents agree some students will not catch up academically, I'm wondering, does that mean they will never catch up, Dr. Cunningham? And who would be most at risk here?
Yeah. One of the sad things about the pandemic is it really shows some of the inequalities within our education system. We know that those students who don't have access to the online materials, or enough devices in their houses, or other learning materials needed to facilitate the online learning or their ongoing learning, or don't have an environment that is kind of allows for encouragement and support, because maybe parents are having to look after loved ones or worrying about the stresses of finances, or they have their own learning challenges, that these students typically have difficulties accessing the education. And that in a typical year, not a non-pandemic year, in a typical year, that these students who don't have access, don't have those supports, or don't have the ability, they typically lose about 2 to 3 months worth of education over the course of the summer. These are key reading, writing, and math skills. Now we look at, we're 14 months plus at this point. It's those students that we worry the most about, that their skills are falling further and further behind. And that when we come out of this pandemic and when we all do return back to the classroom, that teachers are going to have a much greater range of students' abilities sitting in their class. And that teachers and all educators are going to have to figure out how to identify those lower students so that we can intervene and get them caught back up, pull them back up into where they need to be so that they can engage in the type of learning that all students are doing.
One final question about the numbers, and then I want to get an overall look to the future with you. But we have talked on this program a lot about the mental health aspects of the pandemic, and this comes through clearly in the questionnaire. About 90% of all teachers think the pandemic will have at least some psychological impact on some students, and 60% strongly agree with that statement. And you indicated as well, this is something that has highlighted for you. What is your greatest concern about students' mental health and psychological impact?
That we don't have the resources to be able to intervene when students now and in the future, that we don't have enough school psychologists in our system to be able to help these individuals, to be able to identify them and then to provide treatment. That educators need more training themselves on how to recognize the signs of mental health issues within their students. And that currently what we see through the clinic is there's a lot of adolescents who are just feeling very lonely and disconnected, that are having a hard time staying motivated in their online learning right now because they don't have those social connections that they have. And so this goes just beyond education, but also into the home, where we need to continue to talk with our youth about how do we help them to create those social connections outside of just playing video games, so that they are having a meaningful interaction with their peers, which is such an important piece of their social development at this point. It
sounds to me like this CBC News questionnaire has illustrated issues, disparities, problems of which you're well aware from this first year of the pandemic. So sum it up for me and look ahead to September, if you will. You've pinpointed a lot of problems and things revealed. What needs to be done between now and then to, if not solve, at least lessen the impact of some of these issues?
Well, the key thing is we need to start acting now in preparing. The education system, I feel we need to start looking to the science about how do we use some of these amazing tools that we have out there to identify students quickly. Tools such as curriculum baseline measures that teachers are able to use to identify quickly those students who have academic challenges. So teachers need to be trained and these need to be implemented so that we can capture those students who have fallen behind. We need to be thinking about how to increase the mental health support systems within our education so that as we transition back again, those students who are at risk for bigger problems or currently have some anxiety or depression are able to be treated. So the key thing right now is getting prepared for the future, using the next few months to be able to help teachers get the training, get the tools in place, and get the other supports around the teachers so that they can be effective in the job that they do when we return.
Dr. Cunningham, thank you for helping us prepare. Really appreciate your insights on this morning. Dr. Todd Cunningham.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.